Welcome to the Businesstalk podcast. I am your host Deepak from India. Today we have the privilege of welcoming Dr. Bella DePaulo as our distinguished guest on the podcast. Dr. Bella is widely recognized as the leading expert on single life. The Atlantic has described her as America's foremost thinker and writer on the single experience. Dr. Bella coined the term single at heart to describe people who live their best, most authentic lives as single individuals. Her TEDx talk, What No One Ever Told You About People Who Are Single, has been viewed more than 1.7 million times. In addition to her latest book, Single at Heart, she is the author of Singled Out and How We Live Now, among several other titles. Dr. DePaulo has written the popular Living Single blog for Psychology Today since 2008, and her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Time Magazine, the Atlantic, and many other prominent publications. Dr. Bella has made numerous media appearances, including The Today Show, CNN American Morning, CBS This Morning, and Good Morning America. She has been interviewed multiple times on NPR and featured on podcasts by CNN, The Atlantic, and others. Dr. Bella earned her BA from Vassar College and her PhD in psychology from Harvard University. After 2 decades as a professor of psychology at the University of Virginia, she relocated to the West Coast, where she is now an academic fellow in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences at the University of California, Santa Barbara. In today's conversation, Dr. Bella DiPolo explores the central theme of her acclaimed book, Single at Heart, the power, freedom, and heart-filling joy of single life. Let's not keep you waiting. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Bella to the conversation. Dr. Bella, we are deeply honored by your presence and grateful for your time with us today.
Thank you. And thank you for such a nice introduction.
Thank you. Dr. Bella, what does it mean to be single at heart? And how does this differ from simply being single for a season of life?
Yeah, people who are single at heart, and I'm one of them, we live our best lives by being single, our most joyful, fulfilling, and psychologically rich lives. We are happy and flourishing because we're single, not in spite of it. And the risk to us is not what we would lose by not putting a romantic partner at the center of our lives, but what we would miss if we didn't. Or if we did, sorry. And that's different from staying single for a while because you really want to be coupled, but you can't find anyone, or you just want to be single for a while you focus on other things. For people who are single at heart, single is who we really are.
Very nice. Dr. Bella, how did your own realization that you are a single at heart change the way you think about strength, freedom, and fulfillment?
For a long time, I just wondered if I would change my mind about liking being single. Would I at some point think, oh, now I really do want to get married? And after a while, I realized, no, self, this is who you are. You are always going to embrace your single life. And once I realized that, then I could truly invest in my single life, buy a home, move from one coast to the other, and change my whole professional identity so that I became dedicated to studying, writing about, and teaching about single life. And I feel like now I am being true to myself, and that's enormously fulfilling.
In the book, you argue that many single people thrive because they are single, not in spite of what kind of evidence most strongly support that claim.
When I was writing Single at Heart, one of the things I worried about is that some people would say, oh, you just think you like being single because you've never really met someone you truly love and who loves you. And that's why I was especially grateful for the stories that were shared with me by people who did find the one. They found people, a person that they were real, that they loved, who loved them. And in one case, the woman was engaged to the man that she loved. And yet, as her wedding approached, she just never got excited about it. In fact, she was kind of becoming depressed. And she realized that this isn't the life for her. And so she called off the marriage and is living happily ever after as a single person. And there are other kinds of evidence too. For example, there are these studies of thousands of people who are asked if they want to be single or if they're looking for a romantic partner. And the people who want to be single are doing so much better. They're happier, they invest more in their friendships, they get more out of them. So it's like they're thriving because they're single and they're investing in their single lives.
Dr. Bella, what are some of the most persistent myths or dire warnings about single life that you challenge in a single at heart?
Yeah, there are so many of them. I'll just mention a few. One is that if you're single, you're going to be alone. You won't have anyone. In fact, people even use alone as a synonym for single, as if they're the same thing. But in fact, often just the opposite is true. So single people on average have more friends and stay better connected to their friends than people who are married. And that's different for coupled people when they start committing to each other and especially when they get married, then they start becoming more insular on average. It's not true of everyone, but they call their friends less, spend less time with them, call their parents less often. So it's just the opposite of what we think. And another myth that's used to scare single people is that if they stay single, they are going to grow old alone and have a sad and lonely life. And again, in fact, just the opposite is true. People who stay single, um, uh, become happier and happier as they grow older. Something that's not true of people who stay married. And I've already mentioned that single people have networks of friends and other people who are important to them, and they tend to their friends. So that's one of the reasons why single people, especially the single at heart, often do so well when they get to later life. Another reason why people who are single at heart thrive in their later lives rather than becoming depressed and despondent and isolated is that they actually like their solitude. They find it relaxing and a good place to be productive or creative. And when you cherish the time you have to yourself, then you're very unlikely to feel lonely. And you're not going to become that caricature of the old person who's all alone and all sad. Another way that single people, especially the single heart, are doing especially well in later life is because of all the experiences they've had at handling all different aspects of everyday life. So, what for people who are married, when they're married, there is something that can be an advantage, which is that you divide up the tasks. So, one spouse does some kinds of things, the other spouse does the other, and nobody has to do everything. Well, that can be great, but think of what happens when the marriage ends by divorce or widowhood. Now, the person is left without either not knowing how to do the things their spouse used to do or being out of practice. And this is happening at an especially emotionally difficult time. Whereas single people, people who have stayed single, especially if they live alone, they figured out how to do all the different tasks. And when they're in their later life, they've been doing it for a long time, or they've learned how to find someone to hire or find people who will help them. And one last reason why people who are single or single at heart especially do well in later life is that they're more likely to have looked in advance and planned. So, for example, some of the people I interviewed for my Single at Heart book told me that they were doing financial planning in their very young adult lives because they weren't counting on a romantic partner to be there for them financially. They were also thinking ahead to the kind of housing they wanted to have. So one person was telling me about doing renovations on her house so that ultimately, as she got older, it would be more uh, friendly for her to live there as an old person. And she was 33 when she was doing this. So she was already thinking ahead to her older life.
How does the cultural script of compulsory coupling shape the way singles are judged at work, in families, and in social life?
You know, people still assume that everyone wants to be coupled and everybody's going to end up coupled, and that if you're not romantically coupled, you're just not as good as the people who are. So in the workplace, you might be expected to cover for married people who want to leave early, or you might get your last choice of vacation times, or you might be asked to come in on the holidays because people think, oh, you're not coupled, you don't have a life. Why don't you just come in and work? In some families, you might be treated as though, you're really not as important as your siblings who are married. If you have married siblings, it's like, the married siblings will be included in certain things that the single people won't be included in. And in everyday life, you're treated as if you maybe are not fully adult. So, for example, you could have these circles of friendship and with single people, with other single people, and you hang around and you do things together. Then someone gets married, and now they just do things on the weekend evenings with their partner and with other couples. And you, as a single person, get demoted to, maybe they'll see you for lunch on the weekday. Um, so there's just so many ways in which this idea that everyone should be coupled infiltrates every aspect of our lives.
Dr. Bella, what did your research reveal about how happy single adults actually are compared to married adults? And why do these findings surprise so many people?
So many people believe that single people are unhappy, and as they get older, they get sadder and sadder. In fact, I did research with my colleagues on stereotypes of single people, and that's what we found. But in fact, when you talk to real single people or do research with them, what happens is that in general, they're happy. I mean, of course, some people aren't, just like some couple and married people aren't. But on average, they're happy every year of their adult single life. And as they grow older, especially past midlife, they get happier and happier. And we don't find that for people who are married. If you follow them through midlife, through the next couple of decades, they are not getting happier and happier. And I think people find this surprising because the stereotypes of single people as unhappy have hardened into unquestioned belief. and their beliefs that are sometimes internalized by single people to the extent that even though they're happy, they wonder, oh, am I just fooling myself? And that's really remarkable that these single people can have what so many people wish they had, happiness and fulfillment, and yet question themselves because of this pervasive assumption that if you're single, you're not really happy, you're not really fulfilled. You have to be married to get that.
You devote chapters to topics like freedom, solitude, intimacy, and our kids, other kids, no kids. Which of these themes tend to resonate most powerfully with people who are single at heart and why?
Think the chapter that resonates most with most people is the introduction, because that's where I lay out my bold, unapologetic message about single life. That single life for some of us is our best life. That's how we flourish, by living single. And in the other chapters, like the one where I talk about loving solitude rather than fearing it, or how single people often have the ones rather than just the one, or how intimacy is a big, open-hearted experience that's more than just sexual intimacy. What I'm doing in all of those chapters is taking ways in which single people have been led to question themselves and ways in which they've been negatively stereotyped and showing that actually there's a strength there. So, for example, single people who like their solitude, who appreciate having time to themselves, may have been told that there's something wrong with them. They're why do they like being alone? And yet, what I show them in my Single at Heart book is that if you can experience solitude without fear or loneliness, that's not a weakness, that's a triumph. Now, as to which of the particular chapters beyond the introduction people appreciate the most, that is different for different people. Some people just love that solitude chapter because they've never heard that message before. All they hear is about the potential risks of loneliness. Well, they don't feel lonely on their own. Another colleague told me that he is assigning the chapter on intimacy in one of his courses this year. So it just depends on their particular interests.
In the chapter, The Pressures to Live a Coupled Life, what strategies do single at heart people use to resist those pressures and stay true to themselves?
Well, one of the things you can do is find your people. So in 2015, I started this online Facebook group called the Community of Single People. And we talk about all aspects of single life except dating or trying to become coupled. If you talk about that, you're out of the group. So we are mostly people who really like being single. And so we know that we have each other and it's not like an unusual thing. There are now more than 10,000 people from more than 100 nations in the community of single people. Another thing you can do is find validating perspectives. So find podcasts like this one that you're uh, doing now, or Lucy Megason's Thrive Solo, or books like Single at Heart, and other media that recognize the strengths of single people and don't just look at them like they're a pile of deficiencies. It's also useful to find or recognize role models. When I was giving a talk to a class about my Single at Heart book, toward the end, A woman raised her hand and she said, I'm in this very big family, and of all the adults, there's only one who is single, and she has stayed single her whole life, and everyone pities her. But now that I think about it, she's the one I admire most. She's the one who has the most interesting life. And so that kind of realization is important too. Some people need to try romantic coupling first, and maybe more than once, because the message they get is, oh, if you had a romantic relationship and you were eager to end it, maybe you just didn't find the right person. But if you keep trying and you are with people that you do like or even love, and yet you still yearn for your single life, that's telling you something. Maybe in singlehood is where you will flourish.
Dr. Bella, I would like to conclude this episode with one last question. You describe single at heart as fueling a movement of people standing up for what is right for them. What changes would you most like to see in how families, institutions, and policymakers understand and support people who choose to stay single?
There are so many ways. So, starting with the policymakers, no one should get special advantages just because they are married. Yet, in the United States and other countries around the world, lots of laws do favor married people. Married people might get more tax breaks, better retirement benefits. And single people are not just disadvantaged in themselves, but also the important people in their lives are devalued too. For example, um, in the United States, a married person can take time off from work under certain conditions to care for their spouse, or their spouse can do the same for them. But a single person can't take time off to care for their closest friend or a sibling that's so dear to them. About family, we need more open-hearted, expansive understandings of what family means. So, family can mean what we usually think it means, but it can also mean the people we choose to include in our lives and treat as family in the most positive ways. And in all sorts of other domains too, people who are single have been treated as if they're not so important and in ways that are not very fair. So for example, in the marketplace, often couples are charged less per person than single people for cultural events, travel packages, subscriptions, insurance, and so much more. Well, that means that the single people paying full price are subsidizing the couples. Why am I subsidizing couples? In the housing market, my colleagues and I have done research showing that rental agents prefer to rent to married people than single people. In the workplace, research has shown that employers are more interested in interviewing married men than single men, and they want to pay them more. And this was in a study in which the resumes of the married and single people were made to be identical except for their marital status. And any one employer only saw one of the two kinds of resumes. So that too is a profound problem that needs to be addressed. And in just about every domain you can think of, married or coupled people are often advantaged and single people are disadvantaged. And one of the implications of that is that when single people are happy and flourishing, that is so much more of an achievement than when married people are, because single people have had all these obstacles and disadvantages put in their way, whereas married people, it's like people have thrown roses over a pathway and told them, all right, now you walk along the flowers. So single people should get to walk along the flowers too.
Thank you, Dr. Bella DiPolo, for sharing your insights and taking the time to be with us today. Your perspectives has deepened our understanding of this topic and given us a great deal to reflect on. Thank you once again.
Oh, thank you. It was wonderful to talk to you.